34% of Americans say violence against the government is sometimes justified. This is according to a new poll published by the Washington Post and the University of Maryland.
The results found that 40% of Republicans agreed it could sometimes be justified for citizens to take violent action against the government. 23% of Democrats and 41% of independents also take this view. That's a significant increase from previous years. Team Rising is here to weigh in. Julia Manchester is a political reporter for The Hill, and Philip Wegman is a White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good morning.
My read of this, well, I guess I theoretically agree that, I don't know how you feel about this, Ryan. I think violence against the government would be justified if theoretically, if they started asking, are you hiding Jewish people under your floorboards, right? Then they would be.
Right. I think it's more an issue of the change in the answer, like the number of people, because, right, the follow-up question is obviously, well, under what conditions?
Right.
I mean, obviously, there are some that we can invent where it would be.
Right.
But the fact that the same question has been asked in the same way over the years, but you're seeing a more significant number, I think, is what's telling about this.
What do you think, Philip? Are we missing something?
No, I think you have it absolutely right. The question is, when is violence against the government justified? Is it because you're really angry about that parking ticket that you got last week? Hell no.
Well, then it's clearly justified then.
But if at some point the regime becomes tyrannical, then I think that the majority of the founding fathers would actually agree that yes, government gets its power from the consent of the governed, and so sure. People have a right to throw off that government. But clearly, that is not what we are seeing at the moment. So, yeah, theoretically, maybe there's a moment in time. I think that Ryan is right. We're asking ourselves a question about the rate of change. And I think it is interesting that at this moment, given the last couple of years, that the rate of change of people saying, yeah, it's totally justified, comes in the context of what we saw during the Trump years, what we see during the Biden years. And this is concerning because we do have a system that works really well. Donald Trump, as much as many people on the left wanted to say that he was a threat to democracy, he got checked by Congress, he got stopped by the courts, and oh, by the way, journalists were incredibly aggressive with him. So the system is working. And so it's a little bit alarming that there are folks out there who might be saying, all right, well, our recourse isn't to work through a system of checks and balance, but maybe our recourse is to be more of, the Minuteman or something like that. And we are just so far away from that.
And right, Julia, and you can imagine two different types of worlds emerging from January 6th. One in which Republican leaders and Republican voters, too, say, wow, that was a massive overreach. Things got wildly out of hand. We are deeply ashamed of what just happened, that the Capitol was sacked in the midst of trying to certify an election that was deemed legitimate by courts all across the country, by judges who were appointed by Trump. And we need to reel this in. We need to reel ourselves in. So that's one possible reality that you could have coming out of January 6th. The other is the reality that we live in now, where you have an increasing number of Republicans who say violence could be justified against the government. And you have in Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona and Pennsylvania and everywhere efforts to politicize election boards, efforts to take people off who believe that the election was fair in 2020, replace them with people who think that it was stolen, so that the next time around maybe they don't even need to sack the Capitol. So, Julie, are you surprised that these numbers are rising among Republicans, setting aside the question on a theoretical basis that it's easy to find an answer that would lead you to yes on that question?
Yeah, I'm not particularly surprised, especially when you have the de facto leader of the Republican Party, former President Trump, continuing to push back on some of the criticism about January 6th, particularly when you have a lot of conservative-leaning media figures from the Trump wing of the Republican Party continuing to also push back against this. Look, I think January 6th and its aftermath proved to be really extremely divisive for our country, really, and for our political discourse. Normally, after major events like this, you see the country unite and get on the same page and such, and you would think that an attack on the U.S. Capitol would unite Americans, but in this political environment, it obviously hasn't. And you have Democrats saying that President Trump, and Democrats and many independents obviously saying President Trump played a role in inciting this violence, that he holds major responsibility in this attack. But you also have those from Trump's wing of the party who look at the January 6th commission and say that it's politically biased. Majority of Democrats and members of the Republican Party who are never Trumpers or anti-Trump. So I think I'm not surprised by the rising numbers among Republicans, because this is the rhetoric you've been seeing from major Republican leaders, and Republican leaders particularly with that reach. One thing I am interested in, though, is how this plays in Republican primaries, not only in 2022 and 2024. Look, I don't think this is a kitchen table issue necessarily, but you have figures like Mike Pence who, have in a way spoken out against what happened on January 6th. His life was literally in danger that day. And you've had a lot of Republicans who have also forcefully pushed back on Trump's rhetoric. So it'll be interesting to see how the debate over rhetoric within the Republican Party and among Republicans goes forward, especially as we approach a major presidential election.
And as long as it's a debate about rhetoric, I mean, it kind of operates somewhere in the, well, how much does this really matter kind of territory. The U.S. has historically had a very low amount of political violence, which is a good thing. We've had very few presidential assassinations, like only, I think, 2 people have been assassinated who have served in the House of Representatives, one by the Jim Jones cult, right? This has not, been true throughout the Middle Ages, the very monarchs and czars, and people were all killed constantly. So it's something that is good about America that we shouldn't take for granted. So if the rhetoric shifting is an indication that we're going to endure more political violence, that would be a huge problem. But I don't know that, the rhetoric was very heated in the founders era, right? And it's like we're no more violent, probably less violent than that. I don't know. What do you think, Phil?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the American founding is that they come up with a solution to the political, the political religious problem, which is how do you get a bunch of people, how do you get a bunch of conservative, a bunch of Catholics and Protestants who have been slaughtering each other for hundreds of years in Europe to come to this country and then live peacefully together. And the way that you do that is you remove government from a lot of these religious questions, and you just let people live on their own. And I think that you are absolutely right. We have had a remarkably small amount of political violence. That is good. We ought to continue in that track and continue to solve our differences with, ballots, not bullets. I think that when it comes to the particular kind of rhetoric, Democrats thought that 2016 wasn't, legitimate. They thought that the election of George W. Bush wasn't legitimate. Some of them did, but they didn't go storm the Capitol and they didn't paralyze, 1/3 of the federal government for an afternoon, right? So it isn't just the rhetoric; it's actually what happens afterwards. And certainly a lot of these Republicans and some of these conservatives who now downplay what happened on January 6th, well, they were pretty earnest about what they thought about it when they were texting the White House, when they were texting the Trump administration saying, you have to do something about this. And so for people to say it wasn't that big of a deal, they were just, ransacking the Capitol on a Tuesday afternoon. Well, it was. And we know that it was based off of what they were begging the previous White House to do to save them. And hopefully, going forward, we can have, really heated debates about inflation, and it will get really technical, and no one will, pick their fists up and try to beat someone over the head. Perhaps, just sort of shouting at each other can just be the limit to our.
And I think your point about the distinction between rhetoric and action is crucial also, because in 2000, I think we can almost it's objectively a fact that was illegitimate. Like the Supreme Court in a 5-4 ruling stopped a recount. Now you could say they made the right decision or the wrong decision, but that's not how we have that is not how we have designed legitimate elections. We don't We don't
It was
say in the
illegitimate because
Constitution.
Florida can't make a ballot that makes sense.
And that was illegitimate too.
That was illegitimate.
The butterfly ballot, guys who don't remember this, go Google the butterfly ballot.
It's so bad. You will vote wrong. Do it. Give yourself the butterfly ballot challenge. You will vote for the wrong person.
Pat Buchanan, the most Third Reich sympathetic presidential candidate we've ever had, dominated in Palm Springs accidentally. So figure out how he got those 2,000 votes. Go take that butterfly ballot. In any event, but Democrats didn't do anything about it other than complain.
They complained
because
a lot.
Democrats have more investment in the two-party system, in it bottling up the energies of the public than the Republicans do, and I think the Republicans are okay with tossing it overboard. But
well, Ryan, I think Ryan is hitting on something here which is really interesting. This is not a majority of folks on the right. This is still a subsection, but you have a lot of conservatives who are saying to themselves, what's left to conserve? And when you say what's left to conserve, then they don't look at the Constitution as this glorious liberty document which limits government. Then you have these conservatives who all of a sudden say, well, these are golden handcuffs. Government should be allowed to do that much more. We should be allowed to do this and do that. And that is a change in the mentality. And once that mentality changes, then you don't have adherence to that system. And all sorts of things that would be verboten before, well, now they can be justified.
Yep, that's exactly right. Philip, Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.